a dress soaked in secrets, a crime scene stitched with lies. Welcome to Grey Whisper. I'm your host, Silas Drex. Tell me, where are you joining us from tonight? Your voices make this mystery come alive. Let's begin. It was a fog-laced morning in late October, the kind that seemed to smother London beneath a blanket of silence, when the case first knocked, quite literally, at our door. I had risen early that day, intending to walk along the embankment before the chill became disagreeable. But I had barely finished my tea when a sharp rap sounded at the door of 221B Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson, with her usual efficiency, intercepted the knock before I could so much as fold my newspaper. Moments later, she appeared at the sitting-room doorway. "There's a young lady here, Doctor," she said with a disapproving purse of her lips. "Dressed for a soiree, not a morning call." Before I could ask further, the lady stepped past her and into the room. She was tall and pale, with a deliberate grace and an angular profile that spoke more of defiance than elegance. Her dress, rich violet satin, clashed glaringly with the hour, though it was tastefully cut and embroidered in an almost ecclesiastical style. I noted with some surprise that the hem was damp, as if she had walked through puddles without care. Sherlock Holmes was seated at his usual place by the fire, fingers steepled, eyes half-closed in apparent disinterest. But I knew him better. He had noted the hem of the dress as I had. He had also, no doubt, catalogued every tremor in the woman's gloved hands and every hesitation in her breath before she spoke. "You must be Mr. Holmes," she said. "And you, madam, have not slept," he replied without rising. "You left the house at dawn, though clearly not from your own residence, and you are here because someone you cared for is now quite dead." The woman's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her knees seemed to falter, and I leapt forward to offer her the settee. "Please," I said gently. "You must sit. I'm Dr. John Watson. You're quite safe here." Forgive me. I wasn't expecting—" She cast a glance at Holmes, who inclined his head slightly, like a chess master acknowledging a move he had predicted 2 turns ago. "You are correct, Mr. Holmes. There has been a death." He made a sound deep in his throat, not quite a sigh, not quite impatience, and motioned for her to continue. "My name is Miss Cora Willoughby," she began. "I am a companion to Lady Charlotte Brackmore of Hanover Square. Last night, that is, early this morning, Lady Charlotte was found dead in her dressing-room. Stabbed." Holmes's eyelids flickered open. "And the police?" "Summoned, of course. Inspector Lestrade is handling the matter. But She leaned forward, voice low. "I do not believe the police will look in the right direction." "Why not?" "Because of the dress." Now Holmes sat forward. "Ah, yes, the titular garment." She nodded. "There was a dress at the scene, one that does not belong to Lady Charlotte. A violet dress, nearly identical to this one." She plucked at her sleeve. "Except it was stained." "Stained with blood?" I asked. "Number with ink, dark violet ink that had bled into the lining. But it was laid out, Doctor, with such intent, as if posed, on the chaise beside her. And Lady Charlotte she was lying beside it. Her own garments were untouched." Holmes's fingers twitched against the arm of the chair. "How did you come to be the one who found her?" "I was returning from an evening out, a private musicale. I had permission. I arrived just before dawn and noticed the dressing-room light was still burning. That was unusual. When I went to check, she was there." "You touched nothing?" Holmes asked. "Only the bell to summon help." Lestrade said the scene was otherwise undisturbed. Holmes stood abruptly and paced to the window. Fog pressed like a wall against the panes. "Miss Willoughby, I suspect that the presence of the second violet dress is not the only detail which has caused you to seek my counsel rather than place your faith in Scotland Yard." She hesitated. "There is a reason, is there not?" Holmes continued, why you arrived here wearing your own violet dress, rather than conceal it." Miss Willoughby drew a slow, rattling breath. "Because, Mr. Holmes, I'm afraid they believe the dress found at the scene is mine, but it is not. I swear to you I never owned that second gown. I would never leave it with ink stains, but it is a copy of yours." "Yes." Holmes turned sharply. "Tell me, was Lady Charlotte in possession of any enemies?" "She was admired by many, but envied by more. Envy can curdle into hatred, especially when it festers beneath the veil of society," Holmes murmured. "You are correct to worry, Miss Willoughby. If your dress was mimicked and placed at the scene, then you are either the intended scapegoat or the intended warning." Watson rose. "Holmes, you can't possibly suggest—" "I suggest nothing yet," he replied curtly. "Only that the presence of a forged garment reveals intention, and intention implies design. This is no crime of passion." He turned to Miss Willoughby. "I will accompany you to Hanover Square, immediately." "I should warn you, Mr. Holmes," she said, voice low, "there is another wrinkle." "Go on." "The door to Lady Charlotte's dressing room was locked from the inside. The window was bolted. No one could have entered." Holmes's eyes lit. "Ah, the impossible crime. Capital. Watson, your coat. There is fog, death, and deception awaiting." As we stepped into the misty morning, I could not help but wonder, if no one had entered the room, how had the second violet dress found its way inside? Or perhaps the better question was, why and for whom? As we rode in silence through the veiled streets of London, the wheels of the hansom cab echoing dully over the cobblestones, Holmes sat with his long fingers laced beneath his chin and his gaze fixed on a spot somewhere in the swirling fog. He had not spoken a word since we left Baker Street, and I had long since learned not to interrupt him during such moments of mental absorption. I watched him from across the narrow seat, the brim of his hat tilted low, a faint tension in the line of his jaw, a signal that his mind was already threading possibilities from Miss Willoughby's curious tale. She sat beside me, glancing anxiously between us. I saw now how tired she truly was. The paleness of her face was not merely fashionable pallor, but exhaustion clinging to her like lace. Still, she bore herself with remarkable composure for a woman who had found her employer stabbed beside a duplicated gown. "Tell me," Holmes said abruptly, breaking his silence as we turned into Hanover Square, "how many individuals reside in Lady Charlotte's household?" Miss Willoughby straightened. "3 permanent staff. The butler, Mr. Ferrars, her lady's maid, Agnes Crane, and myself. Temporary staff come and go, a laundress, a cook who arrives during the day, and her solicitor, Mr. Melrose, who visits on occasion. There are few guests, though she did host a card evening 2 nights ago." Holmes nodded slightly. "And during this card evening was your own violet dress in use?" "I wore it, yes," she said. "It is my most formal gown." "Curious," Holmes muttered. "So the imitation must have been crafted prior to last night, and the motive behind its placement must hinge either on your public appearance in it or the private impression it left." The cab slowed. Miss Willoughby leaned forward and gestured toward a tall, ivy-strewn townhouse with black iron railings. Holmes paid the driver before we ascended the stone steps. The front door was already ajar, and a uniformed constable stood in the vestibule, clearly placed to prevent disturbance of the crime scene. Holmes offered a slight bow. "Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Watson, we are here by request of Miss Willoughby. Kindly inform Inspector Lestrade that we will be examining the scene." The constable blinked and stepped aside without protest. Holmes moved swiftly, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. Miss Willoughby led us past the high-ceilinged drawing-room and up the polished staircase, her footsteps nearly soundless. "The dressing-room is here," she said, pausing before a white lacquered door with gilt fittings. "As you can see, the lock was forced after I found her. Lestrade insisted." Holmes crouched to inspect the damage. Standard police tool. Crude but effective. The original lock. Yes, I see. It's a French bolt mechanism, older than the door itself. Difficult to tamper with from the outside. He rose and turned the handle. The door creaked open. The room beyond was elegant, tastefully furnished in pale blue and gold. A mirrored vanity gleamed in the morning light that filtered through the drawn curtains. To the left lay the chaise longue, where a dress, now folded and placed inside a linen-lined evidence box, had clearly been discovered. Lestrade stood beside it, arms folded and expression pinched. "I expected you, Holmes," he said without welcome. "Couldn't keep away, could you?" "You know me too well, Lestrade," Holmes replied lightly. "And what a case you have this time, a locked-room murder with the flourish of theatrical misdirection. Irresistible." Lestrade grunted. "I'd call it straightforward, if you ask me. Miss Willoughby finds the body. Dress at the scene matches hers. She returns alone, no alibi. Door locked to suggest suicide, but knife wound rules that out. It stinks." "To you," Holmes said. "Perhaps?" "To me, it smells of ink." He crossed to the evidence box and peered down. "This is the dress?" "The duplicate, yes," said Lestrade. "Laid out neatly beside the body, like someone wanted us to see it." Holmes reached in delicately and lifted one sleeve. The inner lining was soaked in a stain that shimmered faintly purple under the light. "Water-soluble," Holmes murmured. The ink bled through the silk, but not across the chaise fabric. So it was already stained when placed here. That suggests it was carried damp, possibly freshly stained elsewhere, then brought here in haste. He examined the hem. Cut unevenly. "Watson, observe this line. The threadwork is coarse, clearly machine-stitched and rushed. Someone created a passable imitation of Miss Willoughby's dress, but they lacked either the time or the skill to replicate it truly." Miss Willoughby stood in the doorway, watching with parted lips. "Then I was meant to be suspected." "Indeed," Holmes said, "but not permanently. This was not a frame, Miss Willoughby. It was a flourish, a message." Lestrade snorted. "Now you're seeing ghosts." "Not at all. Tell me, what of the body?" Lestrade gestured toward a nearby chaise, where a large sheet lay draped. Holmes approached reverently and lifted the covering. Lady Charlotte Brackmore was a woman of perhaps 50 years, still striking even in death. Her hair had been meticulously arranged, and her face bore no trace of surprise, only a strange tranquility, as though she had resigned herself to the violence. The wound was a single, direct stab to the chest. No struggle, no defensive marks. "A clean kill," Holmes said. "And tell me, Lestrade, what weapon?" "A silver-handled letter opener, still missing." "Odd. Why not leave it? Why bother to remove the murder weapon in a locked-room setup, unless one wants to control the narrative tightly?" Holmes walked to the window and examined the latch. "Bolted from the inside," he confirmed. "No scratches. No rope or marks. On the sill, and the height from the ground, 20 feet, Lestrade said. "Impossible without a ladder." "Or wings," Holmes added dryly. He turned toward the wardrobe and flung it open. Inside hung a series of gowns, each in careful order, blues, greys, ivory. One corner of the wardrobe had been cleared recently. The space was slightly dusty but vacant. "Did Lady Charlotte own a violet gown herself?" Holmes asked. Miss Willoughby shook her head. "Not to my knowledge. She disliked the color, said it was theatrical. Yet someone thought it poetic enough to drape in death beside her." Holmes closed the doors and turned to Lestrade. "There is a sewing needle embedded in the skirting board by the vanity," he said casually. Lestrade blinked. "What?" "Half buried, head out, as if dropped and trodden in, the kind a maid might use." Lestrade knelt and confirmed it, cursing under his breath. "So your suspect just changed from a companion to a lady's maid," Holmes said lightly. Agnes Crane, you said? I would very much like to speak with her. She's downstairs. Shaken but quiet. Holmes adjusted his cuffs. Excellent. Miss Willoughby, you've done admirably. I believe you may safely change into something more appropriate for mourning. Miss Willoughby gave a pale nod and left without a word. Watson leaned toward Holmes as Lestrade followed her out. You think the maid made the dress? I think the maid finished the dress, Holmes replied, but I do not yet know for whom. He moved to the threshold, gazing back one final time at the scene. His eyes roved the room not as a man seeing disorder, but as a composer sensing a false note in a melody. The ink, Watson, he said softly. Ink is meant to write things. This dress was not meant to speak of guilt. It was meant to speak, full stop. Someone is writing a message. The question is whether we are clever enough to read it before another verse is composed. And with that, he swept from the room like a man chasing down the echo of a poem only he could hear. We found Agnes Crane in the breakfast room, seated stiffly at the far end of a long, polished table, her hands folded over her lap like a schoolgirl expecting punishment. Her pale hair had been hastily pinned, and though her black dress was serviceable, it bore the wrinkles of sleep lost and nerves worn thin. A constable lingered discreetly near the doorway, but Holmes waved him off with a flick of the wrist and moved to stand opposite her. I took the seat beside him, notebook ready, though I knew he would not need me to record. Miss Crane looked up, and I noted a sharpness in her blue eyes. Fair, yes, but also a quiet, bruised pride. She did not flinch beneath Holmes's scrutiny. You were Lady Charlotte's personal maid? He asked, without preamble. For 6 years, she replied. Her voice was steady, but her throat bobbed slightly with the effort. You attended to her dress fittings, household correspondence, travel arrangements, and so forth. Yes, sir. Most everything, except money matters. That was Mr. Melrose's affair. Indeed. Holmes leaned lightly on the back of a dining chair. And needlework. A pause. If a hem needed mending, I mended it. If a lace needed resetting, I did it. I'm no professional seamstress, but I know a stitch from a snarl. Holmes nodded slowly. Then perhaps you can explain how a sewing needle from your work basket found its way into the skirting board of Lady Charlotte's dressing room. Miss Crane's breath hitched. I don't know. I never sewed in there. Never? He asked, eyes narrowing. Not even in the evenings by lamplight, while your mistress read or took correspondence? She hesitated. Sometimes, yes. Small things. But not recently. Not recently, Holmes echoed, then took a seat opposite her. Miss Crane, you understand the delicacy of your position. A murder has occurred. A garment, crudely made, was laid out beside the body. That garment bore a stain of violet ink and was meant to resemble one worn publicly by Miss Willoughby. I heard, she said faintly. The constables, they talked. I imagine they did, Holmes said dryly. Now tell me plainly, were you asked to sew a garment matching Miss Willoughby's? Her fingers clenched over each other. No. But you did sew one. She looked up at him, and for the first time I saw the flicker of something else. Shame. I didn't know what it was for, she whispered. I was given the fabric, told to follow a pattern. It was left in my room with a note. £5 were tucked beneath it. That's more than a month's wage. Holmes' tone remained calm. And who left it? I never saw, she replied. The note said only, make it quietly, finish by Tuesday, leave it in the coal scuttle outside the service door. That was 3 days ago. And you told no one? Of course not. It wasn't proper. But it didn't seem criminal either. I thought... She shook her head. I thought it was for some secret thing. A flirtation. Lady Charlotte was particular about appearances. I thought perhaps someone admired Miss Willoughby and wanted to impress her. Or mock her. Curious logic, Holmes murmured, but without cruelty. She lowered her gaze. I've been foolish. You've been used, Holmes corrected gently. We all are, in some fashion. He stood and paced to the hearth. And the fabric, was it provided whole? Yes. Violet satin, folded neatly. A new bolt. And the ink? Did you see any? Number Y didn't handle it once it was finished. Holmes turned to me. You see, Watson? This elevates the affair. Our criminal has a touch of the theatrical and the logistical. He or she coordinated resources, instructions, and the collection of the final product, and yet left the construction in the hands of a servant who might at any moment have spoken up. That's bold, I said. It's arrogance, Holmes replied, or desperation. He turned to Miss Crane again. One last question. Did Lady Charlotte have any visitors the day before her death? Only Mr. Melrose, the solicitor. He came shortly after lunch. They spoke behind closed doors. I brought tea. She seemed troubled afterward. In what way? She went for a walk alone, which she never did, and when she returned, she asked for a key to the dressing room, said she would lock it from now on. I found that strange. Holmes's expression sharpened. She feared something, or someone. Yes. Holmes turned on his heel. Come, Watson, the solicitor may not be at his office today, but I fancy we'll find his record of visitation easy to verify. Miss Crane, you will remain at the constable's disposal. You have my thanks, and a warning. You've been touched by something far more dangerous than forgery. She nodded, eyes glassy. We stepped out into the hallway. Holmes paused for a moment, glancing toward the staircase. She's not the type to kill, he said. Too plain for vengeance, too honest for intrigue. But she was a perfect conduit. Someone needed to make a dress. Someone else needed that dress stained. And a third, perhaps, needed it seen beside the corpse. But I cannot yet tell if those three are one. We descended the staircase and passed Lestrade, who was poring over a list of staff schedules. Holmes tapped his shoulder. When Melrose visited, did anyone accompany him? Lestrade shook his head. Not that we know. You think the lawyer's behind this? Holmes's smile was thin. I think he knows what Lady Charlotte feared. Whether that knowledge drove her to protect herself, or was part of what killed her, remains to be seen. A quarter-hour later, we arrived at Melrose and Briggs solicitors, near Cavendish Square. The receptionist, a grave-looking youth with ink on his fingers, confirmed Mr. Melrose's presence, and we were shown into a somber panelled office where the man himself, a dapper figure with a florid face and a nervous mustache, rose from behind a fortress of paperwork. "Mr. Holmes," he exclaimed, "and Dr. Watson. I was just preparing a statement for the Yard." Holmes raised a brow. "You expected their interest?" "Of course. Lady Charlotte's will. I'm her executor. Dreadful business." "I'd like to hear about your visit yesterday." "Certainly. I arrived at 2:00. We discussed alterations to her will." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "What sort of alterations?" Melrose cleared his throat. "She wished to remove a name, one of the secondary beneficiaries." "Which name?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Miss Cora Willoughby." Beside me, Holmes stiffened. "She said she'd had a disagreement. Nothing scandalous, but enough to make her reconsider. She insisted I keep the change confidential until properly filed." "And you agreed?" "I'm a solicitor, Mr. Holmes. I do as instructed." Holmes moved slowly toward the fireplace, hands behind his back. "And yet, less than 24 hours later, Lady Charlotte is dead, and Miss Willoughby's likeness, by way of a copied gown, is found at the scene." Melrose paled. "You think she—" "No, surely not." "No," Holmes murmured. "But someone else knew. Someone who stood to gain if Lady Charlotte didn't amend the will in time. Someone who needed suspicion to fall squarely and quickly, and knew Miss Willoughby's dress would carry just the right suggestion." He turned, eyes burning. "Tell me, Mr. Melrose, where were you last night between midnight and 5 in the morning?" Melrose blinked. "At home, in bed. My manservant can confirm." "Perhaps he will," Holmes said. "But I should like to see that confirmation myself. Watson, we'll stop there on the way back." As we exited into the growing chill, Holmes lit a cigarette and let the first curl of smoke rise into the grey. "Someone knew of the inheritance change," he said. "Someone acted swiftly to stop it, and someone, still at large, is penning their second chapter. That dress was only the beginning." His gaze swept the street as if looking for a ghost. "And mark my words, Watson," he said quietly. "They are not finished yet." The cold pressed closer as we stepped out into Cavendish Square. Holmes walked with his head slightly down, cigarette now extinguished and forgotten, his pace quickening in that peculiar rhythm I had come to recognize, when his thoughts overtook even his steps. I fell into stride beside him, notebook tucked away, though I knew there would be little to jot down just yet. What mattered now was not note-taking, but keeping pace with a mind already a dozen moves ahead. "He lied," Holmes said at last, without looking at me. "Melrose?" "Naturally." He admitted to the will change, but not to his reaction. The removal of Miss Willoughby as a beneficiary is too pointed, too conveniently timed. And his calmness, far too rehearsed. He expected us. But why name Miss Willoughby at all? If he's behind it, wouldn't implicating her be dangerously direct? Holmes glanced at me with a spark of approval. "Precisely, which is why he did not implicate her directly. He merely let her name slip as the recently removed heir, knowing we would connect that to the violet dress. He was feeding us what we already suspected, hoping we would see him as a messenger, not a manipulator." We reached his cab and Holmes halted, pulling out his watch. "There is time before dusk. I would like to speak with the butler, Ferrars." I gave him a puzzled look. "You believe the staff were complicit?" "I believe they were observant, and unlike solicitors, they are not, trained to polish the truth before presenting it." We returned to Hanover Square, where a subdued hush had settled over the house. The constable at the door recognized us and admitted us without question. Ferrars, summoned from his duties, met us in the study. He was a tall, elderly man with a face like parchment and the bearing of an unused chess piece, too dignified to move unless absolutely required. "Mr. Holmes?" He greeted us with a respectful bow. "Dr. Watson, I trust you've had time to review the particulars." "Enough to require your assistance, Mr. Ferrars," Holmes said. "Please sit." Ferrars did so with mechanical precision, his hands folded over one knee. "You were aware of Lady Charlotte's decision to alter her will?" "No, sir. That is a matter typically handled without my knowledge." "And yet," Holmes said, "you recall Mr. Melrose visiting yesterday?" "Certainly. He arrived shortly after luncheon and remained for 25 minutes. "Was Miss Willoughby present at the time?" Ferrars thought a moment. She had gone out for a walk shortly before Mr. Melrose's arrival. "Did Lady Charlotte seem unsettled afterward?" The butler's eyes flickered. "I would not presume to speak to her emotional state. But you noticed something." He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "She rang for sherry, which was unusual for the hour, and she requested the key to her dressing room. I assumed she intended to lock away valuables, jewelry, perhaps." Holmes tilted his head. "Have any valuables been reported missing?" "None, sir." "Very well. Now tell me, were there any other visitors to the house yesterday? Anyone who did not enter through the front?" Ferrars' brow creased. "None that I witnessed. But there was a peculiar sound last evening, after dinner. I believed it to be the coal delivery arriving later than scheduled, but when I checked the rear scuttle, there were no fresh coals, only an empty burlap sack." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Did you inspect the sack?" "No, sir. I thought it an oversight." "Could you retrieve it now?" Ferrars stood without hesitation and disappeared down the corridor. Holmes turned to me. The same coal scuttle Miss Crane was instructed to place the finished dress in. If the sack is from the same night, it may bear marks. Ink, mud, ash. Something. Moments later, Ferrars returned with the item. Holmes accepted it with gloved hands and spread it open. It was ordinary burlap, the kind used by delivery men throughout the city, but one corner bore a distinct dark smear. Holmes sniffed it, then pressed a damp cloth to the stain, blotting carefully. When he drew the cloth away, the violet ink had transferred onto the white. Stained before it ever arrived here, Holmes murmured. So the one who picked up the dress from the scuttle had already handled ink, or had stained it en route. He turned to Ferrars. Who handles coal deliveries? A private supplier, sir. Mullins and Sons, based in Clerkenwell. They deliver by schedule, Thursdays normally. And yesterday was Wednesday. Yes. Holmes straightened. Then someone posed as a coalman. Clever. The alley is narrow, the scuttle easily accessible. No one would have questioned a burlap sack in the hands of a working man. He handed the sack back. Keep this secured. Do not allow anyone to remove it from the premises. Ferrars bowed. Understood, Mr. Holmes. As we exited into the street again, the fog had begun to return in long, low waves. Gas lamps burned gold against the gathering dusk. Holmes lit a fresh cigarette and began walking with renewed purpose. The forgery of the dress was step 1, its retrieval step 2. But the staining, Watson, that is where things twist. Someone handled ink. Not ordinary ink, mind you, but the deep violet used in certain printing houses. It is a color not often seen in correspondence or books, but rather in bespoke labels, theater bills, or, most curiously, legal signatures. Legal signatures? Holmes exhaled a long breath. There are certain firms who insist on unique inks for security. Melrose is one of them. Their contracts are sealed with violet iron gall ink. Rare, expensive, indelible under light but soluble in water. And the dress? Stained with the same. I stared at him. Then Melrose. Had access, Holmes said. Or someone in his office did. Someone who saw the change to the will, who feared its completion, who needed Lady Charlotte dead before that amendment became final. We paused at the corner of Wigmore Street. Holmes stared down toward the darkening silhouette of Clerkenwell. I want to visit Mullins and Sons before they close, he said. If no one from the company delivered yesterday, we'll have confirmation. After that, back to Melrose. But not for conversation. What then? For observation. We arrived at the coal yard just before closing. A harried foreman confirmed their records without delay. No deliveries were made to Hanover Square that week. Their driver had been home with an injured ankle. Holmes nodded once. Thank you. You've helped immeasurably. The foreman scratched his head. Strange business. If it weren't one of ours, who? But Holmes was already turning away. We reached Melrose's street just as the gaslights blinked on. Holmes motioned for silence and drew us into the shadows across from the solicitor's office. The upper windows glowed softly. A clerk, perhaps 2, still worked within. Holmes watched. Minutes passed. Then, at 6:30, the front door opened. A young woman emerged, neatly dressed, her hands ink-stained, her pace hurried. She carried a parcel wrapped in oilskin. Holmes stepped from the shadows like a phantom. "Pardon me, miss," he said softly. "Your name?" She startled, clutching the Arnica parcel. "Annie," she said. "Annie Parlow. I work for Mr. Melrose." "Indeed," Holmes said kindly. "And are you delivering another package tonight?" She hesitated. "Just some forms for the printers." "Which printers?" "Fletcher's, in Covent Garden." "Would you mind if we accompany you?" She blinked. "Why?" "Because, Miss Parlow, Holmes said. "I suspect the last parcel you carried was not forms, but a dress, one that may yet hang a man, or free a woman." She opened her mouth to protest, but Holmes gently lifted the edge of the oilskin. Beneath, barely visible, was a faint bloom of violet on linen. Not ink from a pen, but from a fabric stain, pressed and set. The parcel was bleeding its truth, and the story was not yet done. Annie Parlow stood frozen in the orange haze of the gaslight, her parcel clutched tightly against her chest, as if it might shield her from the reality Holmes had just spoken into existence. Her lips parted, but no protest came. I could see it, the dawning fear, the recognition that the very ink staining her parcel was not accidental, and that we had known what to look for long before she had. Holmes's voice, when it came again, was calm and without malice. "Miss Parlow, I am not the police, and I have no interest in humiliating you, but someone has used you, quietly, deliberately. If you walk away without speaking, the trail will grow colder, and the person who committed murder will be that much safer. I believe you have no idea what you were part of until this very moment. Am I correct?" She gave a tremulous nod, her eyes darting to me, then back to Holmes. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't. It was just errands. Office errands." "Let us walk," Holmes said, stepping beside her. "No confrontation, no threats. Just a walk and a conversation." We began down the pavement, the night pressing in as we turned toward a quieter street. The air was damp, and the edges of Annie's parcel glistened faintly with the ink bleed, now more visible under closer gaslight. Holmes glanced at it but said nothing. "What sort of errands?" he asked after a few paces. "I was told to take this to Fletcher's," she replied quietly. "A small package. No address, just my initials on the note. AP take to Fletcher's." "That's not unusual. We use them often for document binding, sometimes even for invitations and things when clients request embossed letters." "Who wrote the note?" "It wasn't signed, just left on my desk. I assumed it came from Mr. Melrose or Mr. Dantry." "Dantry?" Holmes asked. "Our junior solicitor. He's new, only started 3 weeks ago." "Did you see him yesterday?" "Yes, in the late afternoon. He was in the back office for hours." Holmes was silent for a moment. Then, "Has he ever given you errands before?" "Once or twice. He doesn't say much. Keeps to himself." Holmes slowed. "Miss Parlow, I'm going to ask you something rather delicate. Have you ever seen Mr. Dantry and Miss Willoughby together?" She stopped walking. Her brow creased. "I don't—" Her voice caught. "Wait, yes. Twice. Once he came to the office with a letter, said it was for her, and asked if I could deliver it the next morning. Another time I saw them speaking outside, just briefly. It looked like they were arguing. That was maybe last week." "Did she ever mention him to you?" "Number never." "Thank you," Holmes said gently. "You've done more than you know." She looked down at the parcel. "What should I do with it?" "Give it to me." She handed it over with visible relief. Holmes accepted it delicately, then gestured for her to continue on her way. "Go home," he said. "Do not discuss this with anyone. Not Mr. Melrose, not Mr. Dantry, not even your colleagues. The wrong person might realize you've spoken." She hesitated. "Will I be arrested?" "No," Holmes said simply. "Because you were careful and honest. That may have saved more than just your reputation." She walked away without looking back. We remained on the curb for a moment, Holmes examining the parcel in the dim light. He undid the oilskin carefully. Beneath was a folded handkerchief wrapped around what appeared to be a thin scrap of fabric. It was violet silk, and it was stained. Holmes held it aloft between gloved fingers. The color shimmered like bruised light. The ink spread unevenly across the weave. Too broad to be accidental, too purposeful to be random. "See the edges, Watson," he said. "This was torn from the inner lining of the dress we found beside the body. The real question is, why keep it? To destroy it, I offered, or hide it. Holmes gave a soft grunt. Number. If one wished to destroy the evidence, one would have burned it or buried it. This was preserved, wrapped, sent to a printer. Why? Because it was never just a dress. I stared at him. It was a message, he said. And this is its punctuation mark. He refolded the silk and returned it to the parcel. We must speak with Mr. Dantry. We made our way back to Melrose and Brigg, where the front windows were now dark. Holmes knocked twice, briskly, and after a short delay, the same ink-stained clerk opened the door. "I'm sorry, sirs, but the office is closed for the evening." Holmes leaned in. "We require a brief word with Mr. Dantry. It is urgent." The clerk hesitated. "He may still be in the back. Let me see." A minute passed. Then the clerk returned, his face pale. "He's gone." "Gone?" "He left through the rear stair. Left everything behind, hat, coat, even his case." Holmes pushed past him into the reception area, and I followed. At the far end of the corridor, an office door stood ajar. Within, a single gas lamp burned. Holmes entered. The desk was empty, its drawers open. The papers on top were scattered, as if someone had tried to find something quickly, or ensure nothing incriminating remained. Holmes scanned the surface, then bent to pick something up from the floor. A matchbook. Fletcher's printers. He was preparing to disappear, Holmes said, but he did not expect Annie Parlow to be intercepted. He thought the package would vanish without scrutiny. "But why now?" I asked. "Why flee this evening?" "Because he saw us," Holmes said. "When we approached Miss Parlow, he watched from above, realized the game was over, and ran." He turned toward the clerk. "Send a wire to Inspector Lestrade. Tell him to place a watch on every outbound train station, coach yard, and river ferry. The man is thin, clean-shaven, and likely traveling without luggage. His name is Dantry, though he may be using another. And warn them, he may be carrying evidence of the murder. Or worse, planning to commit another." The clerk paled further and vanished down the hall. Holmes looked to me. "We're close, Watson. This man, whoever he truly is, knew about the will. He knew Lady Charlotte intended to disinherit Miss Willoughby, and he knew that Miss Willoughby's public image could be turned into a weapon. He made the dress," I said slowly. "No," Holmes replied. "He commissioned it, or arranged for it to be made. Agnes Crane was his unwitting accomplice. The ink? From this very office. The resemblance? Too precise to be coincidence. He studied Miss Willoughby. He plotted the whole scene. And now, he's running." We stepped back into the night. The fog had thickened, curling between buildings like smoke. Holmes looked out over the street, then down at the parcel in his hand. "Everything rests on the next step," he said softly. "We must find out who this man really is. Because I no longer believe his name is Dantry, and I no longer believe he entered this story with innocence." He turned to me, voice low and clear. "He's not the lawyer's clerk, Watson. He is the author of the crime." The fog clung thick as we made our way down Gresham Street. Our footsteps softened to a whisper against the slick stone. Holmes walked quickly, eyes sweeping each shadowed doorway, every passing figure scrutinized with a flash of suspicion. I knew that look, the way he held his shoulders slightly forward, head tilted just off-center. He was hunting, not chasing blindly but drawing invisible strings taut, waiting for one to pull back with tension. "Dantry is a fabrication," he said at last, voice low. "He appeared conveniently 3 weeks ago, inserted into a firm where he would have access to Lady Charlotte's affairs, specifically her will. And no one questioned his background? Perhaps Melrose did, but chose not to speak. Or perhaps no one questioned what was so carefully constructed to seem unremarkable. A quiet clerk in a solicitor's office? Nothing could be more invisible. But the forgery of the dress, the staging of the scene, it's elaborate. Holmes gave a tight nod. And that suggests intelligence. Precision. This man studied Miss Willoughby, identified her role in Lady Charlotte's life, and knew the symbolic power of duplicating her image. He even staged the murder as a locked-room puzzle, an elegant riddle to throw off suspicion. I caught his eye. Why the ink? Why stain the dress at all? Because it was never about guilt, Watson. It was about authorship. He paused beside a gas lamp, unwrapping the parcel once more. The violet silk shimmered in the flickering light, the ink spread like bruised calligraphy across its center. Someone wanted to leave their mark, he murmured. Not a signature of letters, but of style, a signature crime. And the motive? Holmes met my gaze. Inheritance, certainly. But I believe there is more. Something personal. Something tied not to Lady Charlotte's fortune, but to her past. We returned to Baker Street just before midnight. Mrs. Hudson, long accustomed to our hours, brought tea without a word. Holmes declined it, instead throwing open his notebook and scribbling furiously at the center table while I stoked the fire to life. After some time I ventured, "What's our next step?" Holmes didn't look up. "We start with the fiction." The fiction, the man calling himself Dantry. There is no solicitor's registry entry for that name, no tenancy record, no payroll file prior to 3 weeks ago, yet he walked into Melrose's office with forged papers and was accepted. Why? Because someone vouched for him, I said. Holmes smiled faintly. Precisely. He pushed aside the notebook and stood. We need Melrose, not the firm, the man, and we must catch him off guard. Within the hour, we stood once again outside the stately townhouse of Theodore Melrose, solicitor and executor of Lady Charlotte's estate. This time, Holmes rapped not at the front door, but stepped down into the area below, knocking on the tradesman's entrance. The door opened cautiously. The maid blinked. Yes? My name is Sherlock Holmes. Kindly inform Mr. Melrose I must speak with him at once, regarding his former clerk, Mr. Dantry. She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared. Moments later, we were led into a back parlor, dark wood, fireless, books stacked in orderly towers. Melrose entered with his dressing gown still tied, his hair slightly mussed. This is highly irregular, Mr. Holmes, he began, voice tight with sleep. It's nearly 1 in the morning. Holmes didn't blink. It's also nearly too late. Your former clerk has fled. Melrose paled. Dantry? Gone? Gone and leaving behind a trail of counterfeit documents, stained silk, and a dead woman whose will he interfered with. Tell me, Mr. Melrose, who introduced Dantry to your firm? Melrose hesitated a fraction too long. A mutual acquaintance, he said finally. Another solicitor, James Shillington of Bedford Row. He wrote a letter of commendation, said Dantry had experience, though modest. And you did not verify it? Melrose bristled. It was a favor. Solicitors vouch for each other all the time. There was nothing suspicious. Holmes stepped closer, voice lowering. Nothing suspicious, and yet your newest clerk took it upon himself to intercept changes to a will, orchestrate a murder scene, and disappear into the night. Either you were blind, Mr. Melrose, or complicit. Melrose's hands trembled. I was not complicit. I swear it, I was deceived. Holmes studied him, then said, Have you that letter from Mr. Shillington? Melrose nodded, clearly rattled. Yes, I believe I do. He moved to a side drawer and returned with a creased sheet of stationery. Holmes took it and studied the watermark under the gaslight. Then he smiled, not in amusement, but in grim satisfaction. Forged, he said. No solicitor's office uses this grade of paper for formal correspondence. The watermark is altered. Mr. Shillington never wrote this. Melrose slumped into a chair. Then, who did? Holmes folded the letter and pocketed it. The man calling himself Dantry. He turned to me. We must return to Lady Charlotte's household at once. There's one place we haven't looked carefully enough." I frowned. "The dressing room?" "No," Holmes said. Her writing desk." It was nearly 2 a.m. when Ferrars admitted us once again. He asked no questions, just bowed gravely and returned to his quarters. Holmes made his way directly to Lady Charlotte's private study, which had remained sealed pending the conclusion of the inquest. He drew a thin tool from his coat and made swift work of the lock on her desk drawer. Inside were bundles of letters, receipts, and, at the bottom, a thin notebook bound in green. Holmes opened it carefully. Page after page revealed what appeared to be diary entries, short, tidy lines in a precise, slanted hand. Holmes flipped to the last pages and began to read aloud. "Have reason to believe someone is watching CW again. Thought it overdone at first, but saw same man twice at corner. Tall, immaculate, did not speak. Reminds me of Edinburgh." He paused, turning another page. "Received anonymous note today. Said simply, 'The dress is nearly ready. She'll wear it in death. Terrified. Cannot sleep. Must speak to Melrose.'" I felt my skin crawl. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew someone was preparing the scene." Holmes nodded grimly. "And she recognized him from the past. Edinburgh, that narrows things considerably." He turned to the final entry, dated just 2 days before her death. "Saw him again. Same eyes, same stillness. Must rewrite will tonight. Cannot risk delay. Cora must be protected. The rest, they'll understand. I hope." He closed the book. "Watson, she feared this man deeply, not just as a criminal, but as someone with history." "Edinburgh," I said slowly. "You don't suppose—" "I do," Holmes said. "Years ago, a confidence man operated in Edinburgh under the name Gideon Marr. Impeccably dressed, unnervingly polite, defrauded 3 wealthy families before vanishing. He was never caught. Rumor had it he used women as part of his schemes. Seduction, misdirection, forged love letters. It would fit." "You believe Dantry is Gideon Marr?" "I believe," Holmes said softly, "that Gideon Marr has returned. And this time, he did not stop at theft. He rose, eyes dark and gleaming. We have a name. We have his pattern. Now we must find the man." I nodded slowly. And somewhere, in the hush of the sleeping city, I knew that same man, Gideon Marr, or Dantry, or whatever name he wore next, was already preparing his next disguise. But Holmes was closing in. The game was tightening, and the final move was drawing near. Morning had broken by the time we returned to Baker Street, though it was a pale and reluctant dawn, more suggestion than light. A raw wind blew in from the river, scattering mist through the alleys and stirring soot across window panes. Holmes discarded his coat the moment we entered, and with barely a word, lit the fire, poured tea, and then collapsed into his armchair as though the weight of the previous 12 hours had only just registered. I busied myself with toast and the newspaper, but neither held my attention. I watched him instead. He stared into the hearth with an expression that to most would have seemed blank, but I knew it for what it was. Calculation behind stillness, the machinery of deduction silently grinding forward. When at last he spoke, it was with measured certainty. "We need to find the original connection between Lady Charlotte and Gideon Marr." "You think they knew each other personally?" I asked. "There is no doubt. Her diary confirms it. Edinburgh. She recognized him, but she did not name him, which means she never knew his true identity. Only the shadow of a man." I nodded. "And Miss Willoughby?" "She's a pawn. For now. But I believe the next move will concern her directly. Marr's methods involve isolation. He erodes trust, positions his targets where they are surrounded by silence and suspicion. We must warn her, and quickly." We arrived at Lady Charlotte's townhouse shortly before 8. The constable on duty looked bleary-eyed, but alert. He nodded us through without resistance. Miss Willoughby met us at the foot of the grand staircase, still dressed in black but visibly composed. She had slept, or tried to, and the result was a tired poise rather than unraveled distress. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I feared you might not return." "We always return when the pattern demands it," Holmes replied gently. "May we speak privately?" She led us into the morning room, a sunlit chamber where no one would overhear. Holmes wasted no time. "Miss Willoughby, have you ever heard the name Gideon Marr?" Her expression didn't change at first. Then, slowly, her brow furrowed. No. At least I don't believe so. He would have been in Edinburgh nearly 7 years ago. Handsome, quiet, polished, the sort of man who drew admiration and deflected inquiry. A pause. Then her eyes widened, just slightly. "There was a man," she said. "At a charity performance. I was still in training then. He was part of the audience, not the staff. He paid me a compliment, I think. Asked what music I preferred. It felt formal, scripted." Holmes leaned forward. "Did you see him again?" She nodded slowly. "Only once. Several days later, at a bookshop." He smiled, but he didn't speak. "And then he vanished. I thought little of it." Holmes tapped the windowsill with a gloved finger. "He was studying you, even then. Perhaps not as a target, but as an archetype. You were reserved, observant, graceful without vanity, the sort of woman who could play companion, confidant, or scapegoat." Her hands tensed in her lap. "You mean he built this crime around me years in advance?" "No," Holmes said, "but once he encountered you again, here in Lady Charlotte's house, the idea returned. You became the symbol. The dress was the ink. The crime was the letter." Miss Willoughby looked away, fighting for composure. "What does he want from me now?" "That," Holmes said, "is the question I intend to answer." He stood abruptly. "Watson, we must visit Scotland Yard. Lestrade may have something by now. If Marr or Dantry was seen at a station, he may still be within reach." Within the hour, we were seated in Lestrade's cramped office, the man himself hunched over a stack of reports, coat draped on the chair behind him. "About time you turned up," he muttered. "We've got something." Holmes sat without preamble. "Tell me." Lestrade pushed a note across the desk. "Train porter at Charing Cross recalls a man matching Dantry's description purchasing a southbound ticket. First class. No luggage. Gave his name as Langford. Boarded the 5:40 a.m. train to Dover." Holmes's fingers curled around the edge of the paper. "Dover," he said. "Of course. France. Marr's last exit was through Boulogne. He'd repeat it. Safe habits in desperate hours." Lestrade raised an eyebrow. "So you agree he's our man?" "I have no doubt," Holmes replied. "You must telegraph the Port Authority at Calais, describe the man in detail, and inform them. He may travel as Langford, Dantry, or Marr, but he always leaves a mark, and this time he's carrying a stained scrap of silk." Lestrade nodded, already scribbling. Back in the cab, Holmes turned to me, eyes still fixed with a kind of relentless clarity. "We must move faster," he said. "If he reaches France, he's gone." "Then you believe he'll strike again?" "I believe," Holmes said quietly. "He already has a plan in motion. The letter, the dress, the murder. These were not separate acts, but chapters in a single narrative, one he authored years ago." I frowned. "What sort of narrative?" "A story of misdirection," Holmes replied. "A riddle, written in violence and silk." We returned to Baker Street to prepare for travel. Holmes requested a valise and had Mrs. Hudson pack it with grim efficiency. I gathered my revolver without needing to be told. We had traveled before for cases, Liverpool, Brighton, even the moors, but this one felt different, tighter, more personal, as though we were not pursuing a criminal, but a performance in progress. Just before we departed, a knock came at the door. It was Annie Parlow. Her face was pale, but her voice was clear. I thought I should come to you directly. I remembered something from the parcel I delivered." Holmes gestured for her to enter. "It wasn't just fabric," she said. "There was a second slip of paper, folded between the silk and the cloth wrap. I never read it, but I remember the color. It was blue. Not parchment. Blue." Holmes stiffened. "An envelope?" "Yes." He turned swiftly to his desk and began leafing through the parcel we had retained. Tucked between folds of oilskin was a single sheet, overlooked, perhaps assumed blank. But now, under the proper light, a faint blue tinge revealed itself. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, in looping, deliberate hand, were the words. She wore it with grace. She died with it beside her. The ink has not dried yet. You're all still writing the wrong ending. Watson and I read it twice. Holmes folded the sheet, pocketed it, and turned to me with quiet conviction. "He's taunting us." "Yes," I said. "But why?" "Because he wants an audience," Holmes replied. "Because this crime was never meant to be concealed. It was meant to be remembered." "And if we fail to catch him?" Holmes looked at the window where the fog had lifted just slightly, the first true light of morning filtering in. "Then the next dress," he said softly, "will be red." Holmes said nothing more as we stepped from Baker Street and into the waiting cab, but the silence between us was dense with thought. The note, its phrasing, its symbolism, its calculated cruelty, still lingered like smoke in my mind. "The ink has not dried yet." I found myself repeating the line inwardly, turning it over, tasting the chill of its implication. This was not merely a message. It was a signal. The curtain had not fallen. The next act was already in motion. Holmes gave the driver an address near the docks, then settled back, his gaze turned inward. I did not interrupt him. Outside, the fog hung low and yellow across the water, and the wind had picked up, bringing with it the scent of salt and coal smoke. It was nearly 10:30. The mail steamer from Dover would dock within the hour. We would be there to intercept it. We reached the customs building at Mill Wall just as the first whistle of the inbound packet echoed across the river. The Port Authority had received Lestrade's telegram, and a dour-looking inspector with thinning hair met us at the gangway with a clipboard and a wary expression. Holmes wasted no time in explaining the essentials. A man traveling under the name Langford, or Dantry, or Marr. Clean-shaven, English, well-spoken, likely carrying no baggage. He will avoid eye contact and move with purpose. Too much purpose. The inspector blinked. "You're not with the Yard?" "I outrank them," Holmes said simply, and without a trace of humor. Together we watched as the passengers disembarked. A well-dressed woman with 2 pugs, a weary clerk, a young couple whispering to each other beneath a shared umbrella. But no solitary figure matching our man. The inspector cursed under his breath. He may have doubled back, taken a later ferry, or slipped ashore upriver. Holmes nodded. Or he's already here. Just not as himself. He turned suddenly and walked with swift strides toward the side of the warehouse, where a second smaller vessel had docked under cover of shadow. A handful of men were unloading crates marked for Covent Garden. "There," Holmes murmured. That man, grey coat, gloves too thin for the weather, eyes scanning every corner but never stopping. I followed his gaze. The man was no more than 30 yards off, speaking with a dock hand, nodding politely. He held a folded paper in one hand, perhaps a manifest, and a walking stick in the other. He turned slightly, and in profile, I saw the clean line of his jaw, the careful stillness Holmes had spoken of. Holmes moved. He walked calmly across the wet cobbles, angling not directly toward the man, but past him, as though he were simply cutting through the fog on an errand. He passed within inches, and I saw the man flinch, just slightly. A recognition, a fracture in the mask. Holmes turned. "Mr. Marr," he said softly. The The man froze. He did not run, but he slowly turned to face Holmes, and there was something uncanny in the stillness of his posture. Composed, yes, but hollow, as though the man had been trained not merely to deceive others, but to abandon himself entirely in the process. "My name," he said, "is Lawrence Langford." Holmes gestured to the folded paper. "And your passage manifest bears that name, does it?" "It does." "Shall we read it together?" "I'm afraid I've business elsewhere." "As do we all," Holmes said and stepped forward. The man moved, but not away. His hand darted not to flee, but to strike. The walking stick snapped upward, not toward Holmes, but toward his own coat pocket. Holmes lunged, catching his wrist. I surged forward, just as the man twisted violently, wrenching free with more strength than I expected. The stick clattered to the stones. The paper fluttered into the river, but Holmes had him by the collar now, dragging him back against the warehouse wall. "You came to write an ending," Holmes hissed, "but you forgot the final line belongs to someone else." The man struggled once, then sagged, the fight slipping from his limbs like breath. "I could have gone," he said quietly. "I could have vanished. Why follow me?" Holmes stepped back, watching him with icy restraint. "Because you built this case like a performance, and you invited an audience." The constables arrived then, summoned by the inspector. Marr, Langford, Dantry, whatever name he truly bore, was led away in cuffs. He did not protest. He did not speak again. But as he passed Holmes, he paused just long enough to say one last thing. "She wouldn't let it go, you know. Charlotte. She saw me. She remembered too much." Then he was gone. We returned to Baker Street with the grey light still clinging to the rooftops. Holmes stood at the window, unmoving as if watching for one last ripple in the water. I lit the fire and poured 2 brandies. "Will Miss Willoughby be safe now?" I asked at last. Holmes turned, eyes still distant. "For now, yes. Marr's design has collapsed. But men like him don't work alone. They leave behind traces, not just of their crimes, but of themselves. Sometimes that trace is enough to make others pick up the pen." I set the glass beside him. "But you stopped him." "For this chapter," Holmes murmured. The story was about inheritance on paper, but it was truly about inheritance of guilt. Marr needed a scapegoat who looked like innocence. And he found her, and almost succeeded. He picked up the scrap of violet silk, still folded from the parcel. He held it briefly to the light, then let it fall gently into the fire. The silk caught immediately, curled black at the edges, then crumbled into ash. Holmes watched the flames as if listening for the echo of a voice still lingering behind the embers. Then he said, almost to himself, "Even ink must burn when the truth is written wrongly." The flames consumed the violet silk with quiet purpose, curling it into ash in seconds. Holmes didn't move as he watched it vanish. His face, usually unreadable after the resolution of a case, carried a shadow that did not lift easily. I waited, sensing that this time the silence was not simply reflection, it was restraint. He was not yet finished thinking, or feeling. It was I who broke the stillness. "There's something that still doesn't sit right with me, Holmes." He glanced toward me, but didn't speak. I went on. "If Marr's motive was to stop the change in the will and shift suspicion onto Miss Willoughby, then why linger? Why taunt us with notes and poetry, with ink and fabric scraps? A man in flight doesn't light bonfires behind him." Holmes turned fully, now folding his arms. "Because, Watson, this was not just a crime of evasion. It was a crime of narrative. Marr fashioned the murder as if it were a confession, written in metaphor, staged in silk, signed with misdirection." I frowned. "But why go to such lengths?" Holmes's voice was low, deliberate, because he thought he was clever enough to get away with it. He moved to his desk, retrieving the folded blue paper from a drawer, the one Annie Parlow had described, with the looping hand scrawl that had mocked us from the start. "You are all still writing the wrong ending," Holmes read aloud, then placed it down. "That line, Watson, it was not a boast. It was a good. He wanted someone to chase him, to understand the elegance of his design." "He wanted you to chase him," I said. Holmes didn't deny it. Men like Ma crave mirrors. They commit their crimes with such flourish not to conceal, but to attract. He left the stain visible. He ensured the dress would be seen, and he used Miss Willoughby not merely as a scapegoat, but as a motif, a recurring symbol. He wrote her into the murder. I shuddered, as if it were theatre. It was theatre. He returned to the window, his eyes narrowing as if he could still see the faint outline of Ma's silhouette receding into the fog. "But something's missing," he murmured. "Some note he never played, some thread not yet tied off." I stood. "You believe he didn't act alone?" "I believe he didn't act only once." We were interrupted by a knock. Holmes gestured for me to answer it. At the door stood a familiar figure. Inspector Lestrade, hair windblown, face grim. "I thought I'd find you both here," he said. "We've had a development." Holmes waved him in without hesitation. "Is Ma speaking?" "No," Lestrade said, removing his gloves. "Not a word since his arrest, but that's not what I came for." He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope. "This came to Scotland Yard this morning. No return address. Hand-delivered. Addressed to you, Holmes." Holmes took it, his brow furrowed. He held it to the light first, always cautious, then broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of creamy paper, the same quality as before. No greeting, no sign-off, just 5 words in the same looping hand. The dress was never hers. Holmes said nothing. He handed the note to me, then turned and walked to the fire. Lestrade looked between us. "What does it mean?" Holmes's voice was a whisper. "It means the first message was not the last." I stared at the words. "You think it's from Ma?" Holmes shook his head. "He's in custody. This was delivered, not posted. Someone walked it into the yard hours after his arrest. That means the story is still being written." Lestrade swore quietly. "So what now? A second accomplice?" Holmes's gaze grew sharp. "Not an accomplice, a rival author, someone who helped write the crime, but now wants their own chapter." He spun toward the desk, retrieving the green-bound notebook we had recovered from Lady Charlotte's writing desk. He flipped through its pages again, faster this time, scanning for something. "Watson, do you remember the line she wrote about the anonymous note?" "Yes." It read, "The dress is nearly ready. She'll wear it in death." "Precisely. But she never wore it. That line, too, was a misdirection." Holmes stabbed his finger against the final entry. "She feared someone who spoke in riddles, who staged murder with props and symmetry. But what if the real danger wasn't Ma?" I stood slowly. "You think there's someone else in the house?" "I think," Holmes said, "that Ma was not the architect, but the instrument. A brilliant, twisted instrument, yes. But someone else gave him the blueprint." He turned to Lestrade. "Has Miss Willoughby been interviewed again since the arrest?" Lestrade frowned. She's under supervision, but we haven't questioned her. There's no case against her now." Holmes shook his head. "No case. But she's the one constant in every part of the affair. She saw Ma in Edinburgh. She was the model for the dress. She was nearly disinherited, then reinstated. And now she receives the benefit of it all." Lestrade looked startled. "You think she's involved?" Holmes paused. Then, "I think she may be more aware than she appears." He moved swiftly, grabbing his coat. "We must go to her, immediately, before this final note becomes a closing chapter written in blood." The cab carried us in silence. Holmes sat upright, eyes forward, not blinking. I could see it now, the shape of his suspicion taking form. A second player. Someone who had orchestrated the greater pattern while Ma played the visible role. Someone who understood symbolism and inheritance and the careful rhythm of misdirection. When we arrived at Hanover Square, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Ferrars met us at the door, his lined face more grave than usual. "She's not in her room," he said. "Nor the drawing room. We assumed she was walking in the gardens, but she's not there either." Holmes pushed past him without waiting for permission. "Try the study," he called over his shoulder, "and check the cellar." I followed as he ascended the stairs, 2 at a time. At the top, he paused, listening. Then he turned left, toward the dressing room. It was there we found her. Cora Willoughby stood beside the chaise where another dress, deep crimson, was laid out in near-perfect symmetry to the violet 1 day earlier. She didn't look up when we entered. "I thought," she said quietly, "you might come." Holmes stepped forward, careful not to disturb the tableau. The crimson dress was newer, unworn, unstained. "You wrote the second note," he said. She nodded. "And the first?" She hesitated. "Number, that was his. But I knew of it. I let it play out." "Why?" "Because Lady Charlotte was going to take it all away," she said simply. "She told me the night before she died. Said she had changed the will, said I didn't deserve it, that I was nothing but a companion." "And so you set this in motion?" "I didn't kill her. I didn't ask him to. But I knew what Ma was capable of. I let him closer. I let him see her routine. I gave him the impression that she feared me, not him. He believed he was in control. He was wrong." Holmes's voice was soft. "The dress? A distraction, always. It made the case about me, while I remained untouched." She looked at him then. "You said the story was written in ink, but sometimes the most dangerous words are left unwritten." Holmes stepped closer. "And the red dress?" She smiled faintly. "I wanted to see if you'd understand the final verse. You did. So now you may take it." Holmes looked at her for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he said, "You'll say nothing more." She gave a tiny nod. He turned and left the room, and I followed, wordless, breathless, wondering whether justice had just walked out the door in silence or remained in the room behind us, folded carefully into a crimson sleeve. Holmes said nothing as we descended the staircase, the soles of his boots soundless on the worn carpet. The fog had not yet cleared from outside, and the house seemed to breathe with its own silence, as though holding itself still to avoid drawing attention to the thing that had just been spoken. No, revealed. Upstairs. I followed him without a word, still hearing her voice in my head. I didn't kill her. I didn't ask him to. But I knew. In other cases, the turning point would have come with a cry, a confession, the clink of iron cuffs. But not this time. There had been no moment of collapse, no plea for understanding. Only a strange, private satisfaction in Cora Willoughby's voice, and a kind of resolve I had not known she possessed. Holmes paused in the foyer, hand resting lightly on the newel post. Ferrars watched from the far corridor, but wisely said nothing. After a moment, Holmes turned to him with the air of one closing a book. "No one is to disturb Miss Willoughby for the next hour, nor is anyone to remove that red dress." The butler bowed. "Of course, sir." Outside, the air was brighter, but no less cold. We walked a short distance in silence, the noise of the street oddly distant, as though the world itself had grown uncertain how to reassert itself after the tableau we had left behind. It was I who finally spoke. "You're not going to arrest her?" Holmes didn't slow. "No. But she as much as admitted—" "She admitted complicity, Watson," he said, turning his head slightly toward me. "Not murder. But surely she orchestrated." "No," he interrupted. "She recognized. She allowed. She saw what Ma would do, and rather than stop it, she folded herself into the script." We walked on. "I despise it," I said. "It's monstrous. A woman dies, Another takes her inheritance. And Holmes, she smiled. There was no remorse. Remorse is not the measure of guilt, Holmes said. Nor is its absence the measure of innocence. He stopped at the corner of the street and looked back toward the house. She's not a criminal in the legal sense. She will inherit nothing that the law does not allow. She placed no blade in Lady Charlotte's heart. She made no arrangements with Ma. In the cold eye of the Crown, she remains unblemished. But not to you. Holmes turned to me then, and there was something in his gaze, calm, sharp, almost weary. No, he said quietly. Not to me. We returned to Baker Street in the early afternoon. Mrs. Hudson had already laid out tea, and Holmes sat at his desk, fingertips together, his expression unreadable. The crimson dress remained in his thoughts. I could tell. He had not brought it with him, but he had brought its meaning. Cora Willoughby, I said at last, unable to contain the thought, played a longer game than Ma. She did, Holmes replied, and more quietly. She had the patience of someone willing to let others write the first half of the story, provided she controlled the final page. He poured tea but left his untouched. Her complicity was not in what she did, Watson. It was in what she allowed to happen. She allowed the crime to unfold, knowing how it would end, not because she desired blood, but because she desired to matter. To matter, I echoed. She had been written out of Lady Charlotte's life. First emotionally, then financially. Ma offered her a chance to exist in the narrative again, not as a name on a will, but as a symbol. And she took it. I felt a chill crawl along my spine. So the violet dress, the ink, the locked room, all of it was theatre, yes. But in the end, the audience applauded the wrong character. Holmes nodded. I often say the criminal mind is a playwright, he said. But in this case, I underestimated the quiet brilliance of the one who never took the stage. He rose then and went to the fireplace, watching the flames for a long moment. The shadows danced against the coals, casting long fingers along the stonework. It would be easy, he said softly, to write her off as cold or cruel. But I do not believe she is either. I believe she is tired. Tired? Yes. Tired of being overlooked. Tired of being useful but never central. Ma gave her an escape route, and she took it. And when he tried to claim the final flourish with that second note, she reminded him, and us, that she was not a pawn. She was a reader who picked up the pen. I stirred my tea. You won't tell Lestrade. I'll give him the details that matter, Holmes said. The man who forged a name and manipulated the crime, the one with ink on his fingers and blood in his thoughts. Let Scotland Yard have its villain. And the woman who watched it unfold? She'll inherit a fortune, and with it, the weight of silence. That, I suspect, is punishment enough. The next morning, a letter arrived in an envelope of pale ivory. No return address. Holmes opened it without expression and passed it silently to me. It read, "The red dress is folded away. I'll wear black now, as they expect me to. But know this, I remember everything you did not say, and I am grateful." I folded the letter carefully and placed it aside. Holmes said nothing. He simply reached into his drawer, withdrew a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote one single line in his precise, narrow hand. Every crime is a story. Every silence, a sequel. Then he sealed the page and tucked it into his case file. The case of the dress that matched the crime scene had ended. But in my heart, I knew it would never fully close. Because the most unsettling truths are not found in the knife, or the motive, or even the man who fled into the fog. They are found in the quiet rooms behind locked doors, and in the women who never needed to raise their voices to rewrite the ending. The storm that had hung over the case began, at last, to break. In the days that followed Ma's arrest and Cora Willoughby's silent ascent to solitary prominence within Lady Charlotte's household, Holmes moved with a curious stillness. He did not pace or fiddle with his violin. He spent his time reading poetry, unusual for him, and examining with great care the handwriting of anonymous letters that had never asked for answers but always implied them. He had declined all interviews. Lestrade had been given a full report, neatly typed and precise. Marr, whose real name, it turned out, was Elias Dryden, was charged not only with obstruction and forgery, but as a principal in the murder of Lady Charlotte Brackmore. There had been a moment when the law considered naming Miss Willoughby as an accessory, but Holmes dissuaded them quietly and thoroughly, without ever making a public case of it. As far as Scotland Yard was concerned, she had been a victim of proximity, nothing more. Yet Holmes and I knew better. One grey morning, a week after the final letter had arrived, we received an invitation from the executors of Lady Charlotte's estate to attend the formal reading of the will. Holmes declined outright. I, perhaps more sentimental, attended alone. The room was half full, distant relatives, solicitors, and one sharp-eyed journalist pretending to be legal counsel. Cora Willoughby sat at the far end, dressed in dark grey, her gloves perfectly fitted, her posture impeccable. She did not speak, nor look at anyone. When her name was read as the primary beneficiary, no one reacted with surprise. Least of all her. I left without speaking to her. That evening, as Holmes and I sat by the fire, I finally asked the question that had lingered on my tongue since the day we'd left her standing beside the crimson dress. "Do you believe she'll do it again?" Holmes considered the fire for a long time before replying. "No," he said. "She did not kill for money. She did not kill at all. She permitted it, yes, but only once, to reclaim a kind of authorship over her life. There are women who remain on the margins for so long, Watson, that when they finally step into the center, they need not return to the shadows. They simply no longer care to speak at all." I nodded slowly. "And Ma?" "He'll hang," Holmes said, "though I doubt he fears it. A man who commits murder with a flourish imagines even his death will be remembered. He mistook cleverness for immortality." He poured 2 glasses of sherry and handed me one. "You know," I said, "I've always found it strange, this business of dresses and ink. Why build a mystery around something so delicate?" Holmes gave a quiet smile. "Because, my dear Watson," he said, "nothing cuts deeper than a sharp detail misread. A dress can be armor, a signal, or a weapon. Ink can preserve truth, or obscure it. And in this case, they did both." I raised my glass. "To clarity, then." Holmes lifted his in reply. "To complexity." The fire cracked once, and outside the fog pressed once more against the windows of Baker Street, curious, persistent, and always waiting to be let in. It's 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 waiting to be let in.